Just to go back to some of the topics that we've talked about for quite a while, I want to give you an update. The hotel down at the Channel that's going to be built by Virtual Realty Enterprises, VRE for short. As you probably, if you've gone down to the Channel, you've noticed that all the old cement down by the fountain and all the way down to the Channel has been pulled out. That is now all pavers. They're close to completing that job, and they will be starting on the hotel very shortly. Everything's in place. They've got their permits, they have their financing, everything's in place. So they're hoping to be open about this time next year, if not a little earlier than that. Cypress Park, the park that over there by Cypress and Daytona, where the city purchased that acreage from the school district so that we could then build some additional soccer fields. And, you know, going back a little ways, we had done a field assessment study, and it was pretty clear for a city our size, we were lacking in ball fields, soccer fields, all-purpose fields for this size of a community, and confirmation of that is just simply how hard it is to schedule any of the games, whether you're in soccer or baseball or whatnot. The City Council approved the construction contract for that Cypress Park just this last meeting. It was slightly under budget, so that's always a good thing. And they'll be constructing that, and we hope to be ready to go at the latest March, which we're going to miss part of the soccer season. We understand that, but I wish we could snap our fingers and just things are built overnight, but we want to do it right, and so that will occur. The trailhead at Sarah Park, where everybody goes down toward the water, that's all been redone. It's got a bathroom now. It's additional parking. We're going to have on September 30th. We're going to ask for volunteers as part of Public Lands Day, to help us do some other decorative kind of stuff. So it should be a fun morning. It usually only lasts for a few hours, but that's going to be a very, very nice area. The water fountain's there, and we because the Friends of the Fair, they put in a water fountain that you can fill water bottles with, and it's also got an area if you're bringing in a dog or whatnot, so that there's water available for your pet. So that's a very, very nice feature. We're also going to be starting on, the contract will be coming to council the next meeting, I believe, on the Sarah Park design of the new ball fields and additional soccer fields. That will be phase one. The two phases together at Sarah Park run about $20 million. So we're going to break that up a little bit. Cypress Park, by the way, was just under $3 million. So phase one of Sarah would be about $12 million, and then several years down the line we'll do phase two, which is about $8 million. But phase one plus the Cypress gets us a lot closer to where we need to be in terms of fields in this community, and should alleviate some of the scheduling problems for all of our children. Oh, Mr. Borelli, uh-oh.
Oh, you can't take him anywhere.
Get a close-up here.
Yeah, get a close-up of that. Where's mine? I'm going to put mine over here. Okay.
It was decaf. It was very light.
Yeah. Havasu Riviera, as you know, we graded the road that's needed to do the new marina. And all we're doing right now is waiting on the developer to determine what costs are going to be necessary, and then we will put together a full development agreement with them. They're also waiting on the federal government to get their 404 permits. So hopefully that will be soon, and then that project can get started. we're very hopeful they're going to maintain their timeline of having the new marina launch ramp open around April, May of next year.
It's going to be tight.
But it's going to be tight, is correct. Very tight. Downtown project. As you know, one of the projects for the America's Best Communities competition was a project downtown. The project itself is anticipated to be a public plaza plus a retail development that would have shops, restaurant, microbreweries, coffee shops, ice cream shops, etc. The city purchased the land that's right there at Querio and McCulloch Boulevard. Everybody calls it Springburg McAndrew Park. It's not going to be a park. It will be a public plaza. We'll sell off about half of it to a developer willing to put the kind of development that this community has asked for. I see a lot of things in the social media and whatnot where that the city is building another park and nobody really wants this. Actually, this was a community project. 200 people came together in August of 16, is that right? August of 16, and said we needed to do something to spur development in downtown. And then in February of 17, this past year, 150 people came together and said this should be the city's #1 priority. So we have made it a very high priority. We have allocated $1 million of the $2 million that we won in America's Best Communities to develop this piece of property. So on September 29th, the day before we have National Public Lands Day, we're going to have a small celebration on that piece of property for the entire community, and we hope to give a little bit more description of what the plans are. Those plans are being developed right now as we speak. Interestingly enough, we're hearing that there is already quite a bit of interest from developers in developing the other half of that property. And who wouldn't? If the city is building a public plaza where people are going to gather to listen to music, Wi-Fi, there'll be shade structures, etc., and plenty of parking that has already been developed, essentially you're bringing your customers to that development. And so again, we're seeing some interest there, and we're pretty happy about that. We don't have a specific timeline at this point in time. It will really depend on whether, on how soon we can get a developer to agree to build that commercial activity or those commercial establishments. We anticipate that it would be at least 2 stories, maybe 3. And it would be kind of a U-shaped, which will really help the public plaza because it creates shade of that western sun. And that'd be very, very nice. We also hope to locate the Entrepreneur Center on the 2nd or 3rd floor of that building. That would be leased by the Partnership for Economic Development. So again, a developer is very interested because we already have the first customer. So that makes it pretty easy for him. And then, by the way, we allocated $500,000 to the, was it the ECO?
Mm-hmm.
To the ECO.
Environmental Learning Center.
Yeah, the Environmental Learning Center. 500,000 of that $2 million is allocated to that. 400,000 is being allocated to the co-location center, the Entrepreneur Center. And then, yes, that only adds up to 1.9 million. $100,000 is being withheld for the other groups on tourism, education, community engagement, so that they can make sure that any project that they come up with, that there's funding available. We also understand that we're going to receive $300,000 of in-kind services from Cisco Systems as part of this competition. So we're really excited about all of that. The last thing I want to talk about, and then I'll open it up for questions. You've probably read in the paper about some of the financial woes that the county is going through, trying to balance their budget and whatnot. And it's interesting whether it's on social media or it's letters to the editor like we saw yesterday. Somehow the city gets lumped in with the federal government, the state government, the county governments, as that we're raising taxes, don't have any money, whatever. Well, to use a current term, well, that's fake news. Absolutely fake news. Your city is in outstanding financial shape. As of last April, we exceeded $30 million of reserves in our general fund. We are not raising taxes, and in fact, we lowered the tax rate this year and last. We haven't raised water or sewer bills in 7 years, and don't anticipate anything in the near term. We did raise the trash bill by 62 cents. I'll give you that. But that was to make sure that we have all those new trash cans and whatnot, and so that we can recycle, extend the life of our landfill, etc. But to say that, I think one of the statements in there was that we spent $1 million on Cypress Park and really didn't need to because we were renting it. And why buy it if you're renting it? Well, that's pretty simple. How many of you would, on land you do not own, put in $3 million investment? I don't think anybody in this room would do it. Either would we. We are not going to spend money foolishly so that at the end of the lease, if it's not renewed, all of that infrastructure disappears. So that's why we purchased it. And I think it also said because of that $1 million purchase that we were going to raise taxes, and again, absolutely false. What really has happened here at the city, and I've mentioned this before, when we saw the Great Recession hitting us, we took a step back, and I think there was general agreement that the recession was not going to be a short recession. Based on all the factors we looked at, we felt that recession was going to be a long-term recession, and it was. So what we did was we immediately made adjustments. We were unwilling to spend our reserves, which at that time were not real high to begin with, but we weren't willing to spend our savings to maintain our lifestyle. So instead, we ended up very painfully making cuts of about 20% to the staff at the city. And then we asked Mr. Cassens, and he did a great job at this, to find a way to reorganize the entire city operations so that we never have to hire those people back except in some unusual circumstance. And that's exactly what he did. And to this day, I think that we maybe added 5 or 6, 8 people,
In IT mostly.
mainly in IT and a few planners. But the IT people is because they are creating more efficiencies so that we don't have to hire people back. So all those years we ended up not hiring back. We don't see that we have to. And what happened? We built reserves during the Great Recession. And now that we are officially out of the recession, we continue to have very strong reserves. The city personnel do a great job of staying under budget. When bids come in over budget, we typically rebid. We don't want to just sit there and accept bids that are too high in our own eyes. I say that we're officially out of the recession because we do this comparison of sales tax revenues all the way back to 2006 and 7, which was the start of the Great Recession, was the last good year, quote unquote, we had. This year, our sales tax revenues will exceed that year by 22,000, so we're officially out of the recession. And that's with construction being substantially lower than it was. But that's actually a good thing. I think the people in the construction industry will tell you that having 75 building permits a month was a bubble that could not be sustained. Now we run right around 20 to 25. Maybe sometimes it goes up a little bit from there. That's a very sustainable activity. We are getting closer to running out of lots, but when we do, we anticipate that the Arizona State Trust lands will open up the property just north of, south of the airport and kind of where the construction stops around Kiowa. They'll probably open up that acreage. There's about 4,000 plus acres there.
Can I chime in for?
Absolutely.
Interestingly enough, back in the what we call the good old days, our peak years, 06, 07, like the mayor mentioned, 30% of the city's tax revenue was building related, and construction, obviously, and just housing related. And while that has not come back to pre-recession levels, what has replaced it in our tax revenue categories is car sales. 33% of the city's sales tax revenue is related to cars and selling cars and parts. So I just thought that is an interesting factoid.
So if your car is 2 years old or more, buy a new one. We got to keep this going. But what it really tells you, and I think Charlie's right, our construction was really the tail wagging the dog, and you never want to be in that position. Now, general retail activity is what's occurring in Lake Havasu City, and that shows a strong economy for us. Tourism is at its highest level ever, so we're excited about that. So the moral of the story is when you see these letters saying that we're broke, we don't have any reserves, that we're going to raise taxes, it's alternative facts, fake news, whatever you want to call it, but it's absolutely not true. We have if anybody doubts what I'm saying, we'll show you the financial statements. They're there, and they're going to show that we've really in a good position. The other thing that we did, by the way, as many of you know, the sewer project was, in terms of repayment, was killing us. We were owing somewhere around $22 million a year because way back when that debt all got front loaded. And when we came along, we said as soon as that project is complete, which by the way, it was completed with about $100 million plus under budget. But as soon as it was completed, we went to the public markets, refinanced all of our debt at very low interest rates, and we went from a $22 million a year payment down to $13 million a year payment, which is much more manageable for all of us. It also gave us what we call generational equity. So in other words, if you're living here today, you won't pay any more than somebody that moves here 10 years from now or 20 years from now. Under the old method, the way it was, you would have paid about 75% of the debt, and somebody moving here 10 years would basically be no debt. Not fair so it created that generational equity. We all pay the same, and what it's been able to do is we won't need to we haven't raised rates since 2010, and we don't anticipate a rate increase until I think roughly 21 or 22, if that. So revenues have been pretty much what we've projected today.
Yeah, as long as there's not a hiccup in our operating expense.
Right.
If something should fail or we would experience a sudden increase in our operating expense, our rate structure should remain very stable for many years.
Yeah. So And by the way, if any of you are interested and you like to make investments in tax-free bonds, that's what we did. Those are tax-free bonds. You can actually buy them through your broker and whatnot. And
Expenditure limitation?
well, one other thing I want to do on the sewer. One of the things that made this all possible was the help of Senator Borelli, because when we wanted to refinance our debt on the open markets, all of our debt was through a state agency called WIFA, Water Infrastructure Finance Authority. And we went in and we went to them and said, well, we'd like to be able to refinance this over 30 years through you. And they said, one, they said, not just no, but hell no. And number two, they said, and if you try to go to the open market, we're going to charge you $15 million in penalties. Nice, huh? So we went to Senator Borelli. He ran a bill for us that prevented them from doing that. By the way, they had no authority other than their own policies. They had no authority to charge us the $15 million. It was not in any of our financing contracts whatsoever, but they were basically insisting on it. So
Said it was their policy.
it was their policy is what they said, which I don't really care. Senator Borelli ran the bill, went through the House in flying colors, the Senate in flying colors, and the governor signed it, and we were able to finance without that $15 million penalty. So thank you once again for those efforts.
Expenditure limitation?
I'll let you explain that one. And then one final thing that Charlie will try to explain, because this is going to be coming to the ballot in 18, and it's something very, very important. I'm just going to lead in just briefly. That letter to the editor yesterday said that we went into debt over the purchase of this thing. That's not true, and it is true. And this is where Charlie's going to get into it a little bit more. We're bucking up against something called an expenditure limitation. It's a law passed in Arizona in 1980 when our community was only 2 years old. So long and the short of it is we're in a terrible position because our population was very small, expenditures were very small back then. But there's a silly rule as part of this expenditure limitation. And it basically says that you can't spend money over your limit unless you borrow it. Then you can do it. Silly, right? So how did we buy that park? We took out a $1 million advance and then we pay it off. And it doesn't count against us on the expenditure limitation. Crazy, we know it, but there is a fix, there is a legal fix, and Charlie, that's where I'll give it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And those of you who are regulars have heard us harping about expenditure limitation for quite a few meetings. But it's, as the mayor said, it's a 1980 state law that went into effect kind of on the heels of California's Prop 13. Prop 13 limited the amount of taxes that public agencies could collect, property taxes. In Arizona, they took a different tack, and instead of limiting the amount of taxes that could be collected, they limit the amount of spending that public agencies can have. And it's based on a fairly complicated formula that goes back again to 1980. And there are base numbers and there are escalators, and it takes population and state domestic product into effect. And while we have been safe from expenditure limitation since 1980, because of our population growth and because of the borrowing that took place on the sewer project and other factors, that we've had this cushion between the city's spending and the expenditure limitation ceiling. Well, now that the recession's over, our population numbers have kind of tapered off, and the borrowing, we've taken care of some of the debt. That ceiling and our spending have kind of come to merge, and so we're right there now. And despite the fact that we have over $30 million in reserves, we can't spend it because we have this limitation, this state law, that really doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense for us. But it goes back to this 1980 calculation, and the city was incorporated in 1978. So this calculation is based on very low numbers that existed for Lake Havasu City back in 1980. So there's a number of options. The cure, and 85% of Arizona cities and towns have addressed expenditure limitation in one way or another, and there's only a handful of options. One is to do a one-year override. Basically, you go to the voters and get authorization to exempt the city from expenditure limitation for a single year. While that obviously is not sustainable over time, another option is to do what they call a home rule election, where you do the same thing. You go to your voters in the city and get them to pass a home rule exemption. That gives you 4 years. It has to be it has to go back to the voters every 4 years and be reauthorized. That's what many cities and towns in Arizona have done. Kingman, for one example. But for us, it seemed to me the best option for Lake Havasu City is to actually go back to that 1980 calculation and change our base calculation number. And back then it was $2.5 million. If we change that number to $5 million, then that will allow us to be exempt from expenditure limitation to what we see as our build out at 96,000 population somewhere in the next 40 to 60 years. So that will protect us. You know, the original calculation protected us well past our halfway point. You know, we're at 54, 55,000 population now. We're going to finish out at 96,000 population because that's all the water we have. So the original calculation brought us to past the halfway point. If we double that, that will take us beyond the finish line here in Lake Havasu City. So that's what I'm proposing to council, is that in the fall primary election of next year in 2018, there will be a ballot item on your ballot to authorize the city to change its base calculation from $2.5 million to $5 million. And that's all it does, is it relieves us from this kind of arbitrary and unnecessary statewide limitation on what the city can spend. It does not, and I'm sure it's going to be couched in a way that you should not vote for it, because then there's going to be unlimited city spending and they're just going to blow the lid off of spending and there'll be no accountability. None of that is true. All it does is allow us to continue to do our budget process the way we've always done it, which is obviously a very transparent process. It's done by our elected officials. None of that will change. All it does is remove that. It basically gets the state out of our budget process, and allows for projects to be done without having to borrow the money first and then pay it back. All that does is add time to the process and expense. And right now, the expense isn't that great because interest rates are very low. But obviously, that's not a sustainable condition either. So all that's going to do is just get more and more expensive over time. So, thank you.
Yeah, it's pretty unusual when you have all this money in the bank that we saved over the years, and then a state law says, well, you can't spend it unless you borrow it first. Really? It's like, okay. So I'm hopeful, and there'll be a lot more education on all of this as time goes on, but it will be on the ballot in 18, and hopefully it will pass, and then we can do the things that this community has asked the city to do. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. Anyone? Yes, sir.
I've got one question in regards to what we were just talking about. Mark?
Charlie. He's talking to Charlie.
He's Mark. I'm Charlie.
I'm new here. I don't know everybody.
We're the comedy team with Mark and Charlie.
I'm thinking about that, and the $2.5 million, and you want to take it to $5 million.
Mhm.
Right? Do we know what we're going to be spending over the next 5 years that's going to cost that $5 million? that we might, where we would have to borrow it? Do we have any, look at?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. The borrowing that we would have to do if the expenditure, if the voters do not allow us to remove the expenditure limitation rule, essentially our operating budget would go from, right now it's about $150 million. That includes our enterprise funds, water, sewer, everything, all combined. 150 million would take us down to about 57 million. Would be the limit on our internal spending. So obviously, that would be huge. You know, the borrowing, we could continue to build. Our capital improvement program, which is the brick and mortar stuff, the pump stations, the playing fields, all of that, we can continue to build stuff by borrowing. We could just take out a bond issue. We could build it and then pay off that debt with cash, which the city has. What it doesn't do, though, is relieve the city from the expenditure limitation with respect to the ongoing operation and maintenance of those facilities. So at Tuesday's
public
meeting,
safety.
well, yes, and if we do have to cut back that extreme amount, Mayor's right. You know, when 70% of your operating budget is payroll, and 70% of your payroll is public safety from the in the general fund, that doesn't leave a whole lot of room if you to find that money elsewhere from police and fire and parks, recreation, and those other general funded services. So that would be quite the dilemma. I mean, we would be faced with quite a dilemma if we had to reduce our operating budget by $116 million. That would hurt.
Well, it's interesting because Mayor brought up about that letter, and I read that, I'm sure we all read the letter.
Mhm.
That was in the paper yesterday, and there's an explanation behind it that you're given for it, and it should take away all that.
Yeah,
Fake
well,
news.
I mean,
It's fake
it's
news,
always
right.
going to be there in some form or another. Some folks just don't want to hear it, but that's why we're glad you're here to hear it from the source.
Other questions? Chuck?
In reference to that letter, I think it's people that don't know really, they want to comment on something, but they don't know how the infrastructure actually works. They don't know how state government works compared to city or county or something like that. They're just
Sure.
hearing rumors and they want to comment on it. The other thing is on that park, or not the park, the center
Oh,
that
sure.
we're putting in, Aquario and that.
Uh-huh.
Are you going to have any kind of working group to kind of give advice over what we actually want inside the?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because I was thinking, years ago, in a lot of the small towns, I don't call this a small town, but in the center of the town it's not like a band shell, but like a huge shade covering type thing that people could go up there and like have a little concert and stuff like that.
Right.
In that area. That would, I think, would be great right in the middle of that.
That's the plan.
Yeah, that's very similar to what's already being discussed. The working group is primarily for the folks that were on the Vision 2020 team, or the America's Best Communities team. There's about 50 of them. But there is a smaller group right now working with the design, including, I believe, Michael Gordon, James Gray, and several others, working towards coming up with some initial designs that then we will share with the public to get input and make changes as necessary. So it will be, it's not an overnight process, but when you're going to make or construct something as substantial as this, we want it to be right. We don't want to do it on the cheap or any of the rest of it. And we realize that $1 million will not finish that project, but it's $1 million that we didn't have just 6 months ago, and so we're happy to have it and use it in the best way possible.
Now, selling off the property, how much area, how big is the thing originally?
It's about an acre and a half,
Acre and a half, and how much are you gonna sell off to develop?
about half,
About half of it.
correct.
Okay, so the money that's sold off for the.
Can be
the
used to-
receiver, are they gonna put that in that park too?
Yes, I mean, we would end up,
Be an
Um,
offset.
Even in that infrastructure?
yeah, because one of the things, for instance, one of the things that we have to build is a small pedestrian bridge that goes over that wash so that we can connect it to the parking lot that's there.
Now,
So
is it gonna basically be concrete, or are they gonna put grass in it?
I doubt it'll be grass.
There'll be
It's just
some
gonna be hard.
There'll be landscaping, but I don't think it's going to be grass. You know,
I'll get out there with a little one.
Chuck with a lawnmower.
Yeah.
Wow.
just,
The writing one.
oh my, Forrest Gump. All right, other questions? Yes, sir.
I read an article last night about Prescott having problems with their retirement system for
Yes.
public employees. What's the status of our retirement system here for the public safety employees?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Every city and town and county in the state of Arizona has an unfunded liability.
Oh, you leave?
This goes back many years where benefits were granted, but what happens is that a lot of times the benefits are granted at the state level, but they're all paid for by the county and the city folks. Our unfunded liability is 51, is that right?
It's inching up on 60.
Okay, inching up on $60 million. However, we have a plan in place to be able to reduce that unfunded liability, and then the plan would actually be that we would be able to make a substantial deposit to it, and the cost of doing that would actually be paid for by the reduction in our annual payments. So we're working that right now to make sure it all comes together. The fact that we have a $60 million or inching up to $60 million unfunded liability doesn't mean firefighters, police, etc. are not going to be able to retire. There's plenty of money there. It's just that if everybody retired right now, that would be our ongoing commitment. We know it has to be dealt with. Prescott has a very unique problem because of the Yarnell fire that occurred, and some of the smaller communities have a really difficult time because they actually have more people that are retired than they have working.
Or
That's
they have
always a problem.
very old departments
Right.
with a lot of people in the system, like Bisbee. They're in a tough spot as well. Prescott is one, but there are others
Correct.
that have a lot of members in the system.
Now, one of the things that we have done at the League of Arizona Cities and Towns is we convened a task force just a couple of years ago to try to find a better way to fund retirement for police, fire, and others. The police and fire associations recognize, to their credit, that this was not sustainable, that eventually adding to benefits, and unfortunately benefits were added last year again, but to continue to add benefits without a funding source is a problem. So they finally agreed to create what's known as a Tier 3 employee base. So all new employees would come into this Tier 3, and so the way it is funded is substantially different. And correct me if I get these numbers correct or wrong, but right now, pretty much I believe that the employees' contribution is about 11%. And the employer has to fund the rest of it. Tier 3, it's 50-50. And
PBI.
yeah, and they also have the ability to do a defined contribution plan versus defined benefit. For those of you who don't know, defined contribution is kind of like a 401k plan. Defined benefit is where you fund the investments so that a person gets a defined benefit. Those are going away in most industrial companies because they're not sustainable, but they remain in municipalities across the country. And so, but this Tier 3 should help substantially. And so we do anticipate more changes will occur over time, but we hope to put a plan in place that will deal with our own unfunded liability.
Roughly what percentage is unfunded? You said a number.
About 40%.
Oh, okay.
Well, I should say, we're 40% funded.
Oh, 40% funded.
Yeah,
We
and-
would like to get that up to about 65 or 70%. Ideally, it would be 100%, but that's really not necessary.
Correct.
A lot of what I read, the threshold is around 70%, like you said.
Right.
Funded.
With the scenarios, the strategies that we're talking about now at the city, we think we can get to about 65 to 67% funded, and it should be pretty invisible to the general public. We could do better than that if we were to increase our primary property tax rate. That's a political issue that will have to be discussed at some point in the future, but will nonetheless need to be discussed. If we do, if council does take that option, then the net proceeds from that tax rate adjustment, it's not really an increase or a new tax. It's an old tax that we put into a state of suspended animation, some years ago. If we reenact that tax, the balance would be something over $2 million a year, the net proceeds from that. And if we propose to target or use that as a direct offset to our public safety retirement system shortfall, that puts us in a much better position for the long term. So just be ready for that. I'm sure there'll be a lot of political discussion when that starts getting talked about. But eventually, I mean, it's a promise that the citizens made to our public safety people years ago. It's kind of gotten worse over time. Yes, there is an immediate fix for moving forward. It's not a total solution, though, and I'm sure the mayor will agree that at some point that too is probably going to need to be adjusted. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't fill in that hole that we've already dug, and so now we need to look at future strategies to fill in that gap that we already have made.
Well, and interestingly enough, we talked about expenditure limitation. If we wanted to make a $30 million payment, that would count against us. So the expenditure limitation hits you just about every way imaginable. And so the only way we're going to be able to do that is, again, by doing a borrowing that allows us to do it, and this is the time to do it. We're talking about interest rates of around 2% or more, a little bit more, and by doing that, again, it reduces the amount of contribution that we have to make, enough to pay off the debt. And a lot of people have asked me, well, does this mean what happened is that the city didn't make the contributions they were supposed to make? No, we have made the contributions that we were supposed to make, but you got to remember too, it's also ties to investment results.
Yes.
And investment results for a long time weren't as good as that they claimed they could get. And so
Yeah, when your-
taxpayers had to make up the
yeah,
difference.
when your benefit guarantees an investment return and pays it out even when those returns aren't there,
Yes.
obviously that's not a sustainable condition. So it's compounded over time.
I'm in a system like that from an old job,
Right.
so I understand what you're saying.
Yes, sir.
Earlier this morning, there was a lot of police action by Kiowa and Jamaica. Did you hear what that was? Or?
Well, let's find out if the police chief sent Charlie an email. I told you not to run that red light. Chuck.
The interest rates that you were talking about, like the money you borrowed for the park, for Sarah Park and
Yeah.
for that, wasn't it 1 point something?
Correct.
percent?
About 1.8%.
Okay, now what were we getting on, or what do we get on our money that we have in savings? We're actually, you're borrowing against your savings.
About 1%.
Well, so we're paying only 0.8% in tax,
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
in interest.
Yeah. Yeah, we're, our savings, our interest on savings has been, it's gone up just slightly. It was about 0.8%, but it's now hovering right at close to 1%. So you're right, the differential is pretty small.
It does cost money to issue that debt.
Yeah, it does. Oh yeah, there's issuance costs, but in the end, the difference is very, very manageable in today's environment. You know, if we would have a different plan if interest rates were 6, 8, 10%. You couldn't pull that off. You really couldn't. So, so we're taking advantage of it while we can, which is exactly what we did with the sewer project, because we went out on the open market when rates were incredibly low, and and just a side story of that, the day we were issuing the debt, we were working with Morgan Stanley and several other investment bankers, and they got on a conference call and they said, well, you got about $400 million of funding, even though you only need about 180 million actually, $180 million of debt that we were trying to issue, and there was requests for 400 million. And I said, well, it looks like interest rates just got a little lower. And that's what we did. We lowered it again until that 400 million matched the 180 and issued the debt. So there was a high demand for that debt because you know, our financial rating was good, our credit rating was good, and we have always met our obligations. So
It's a good investment.
it was a good investment.
Lou, do you have any insight to what the Fish and Game want to do with the preserve?
Oh, the U.S.
Paper, they're having a meeting and.
Yes, yeah, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. For those that remember, a couple of years ago, they closed an area called the Ride Spot. Nobody knew about it. And this is an area that's up the river just a hair, kind of below where the refuge golf course and whatnot is. And it's a backwater area that is very calm and great to teach your kids how to ski and whatnot, because it's out from the middle of the lake and where all the fast boats are going. Well, they got a couple complaints from non-motorized boating folks that that they were almost killed by boaters. Well, the long and the short of it, and none of that was true, but the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the manager at the time, overreacted, moved the buoys, and prevented anybody from using it. Then they came out with a compatibility determination that they claim wasn't going to add much in the way of restrictions, but if you read it thoroughly, and it could have been just a wording problem on their part, but it doesn't really matter, it was going to create a lot of new no-wake zones, and we had a problem with that. they've come out now. They have a new refuge manager. The old one was escorted someplace else, reassigned. The new one is from Louisiana. His name's Richie Myers. Lives here as opposed to somewhere else, and gets it. He understands what tourism and that lake means to this community. They've issued a new compatibility determination. Those buoys in the ride spot are being placed back to their original position. There will be no restrictions on that. The only thing that they've really done is codify a couple areas where there's already no wake zones, and we don't disagree with that. And then they did some changes up north of 40 as well. And then they also prohibited things like, what do they call them?
Airboats and
Hover or something.
those hover boards with the jet propelled.
It prevented it up in the refuge area. It's just too dangerous. So they are going to have a meeting. I believe it's
Oh my gosh.
17.
August 17th, thank you, from noon till 6. And they'll show you exactly what they're planning. What they ask you to do is if you do have comments, you have to put them in writing, because they said we don't want to have to interpret what you meant when we're having a discussion. So put it in writing and we're good to go. But generally speaking, we're pretty happy with the result.
Where's the meeting?
It will be at the London Bridge Resort at the Sir Lancelot Room, I believe. So, Donna.
I just wanted to say that after our storm on Wednesday night, and my recycle items probably ended up in Kansas, I'm really getting excited about our new recycle furniture.
Yeah, no.
I just wanted to tell you.
Yeah, and we're working right now. We're pretty soon we expect to have the consultants we're utilizing to figure out the life of our landfill and what we can do to extend it and whatnot. We're working with them right now on various ways that we can extend that landfill. In fact, I think we told them our goal is to extend the life of by at least 50%, but it'll be a combination of recycling and other factors to be able to pull that off. But we have discovered that there's a lot of outside use of our landfill, and if we're going to extend the life, we may have to prohibit some of that. Because
Does that mean like Desert Hills?
no, that it means far outside our area.
From
Bullhead?
from Interstate 40 all the way down to Parker.
Right.
And possibly even points beyond. Because our landfill has been so accommodating in the past and affordable, a lot of that waste, and much of it is construction waste and other large scale waste hauling, is coming to our landfill, and so we're the study that we had commissioned with respect to determining exactly what is the expected lifespan of our existing landfill. It came to light just how much outside use is going on with our landfill, and the fact that all of that is not even subject to recycling. So here we are, asking our citizens to really step it up and increase your recycling, and we're discovering that a whole lot of that solid waste coming in, there's no recycling at all taking place. So we're going to be concentrating in areas like commercial waste, biosolids. A lot of the biosolids waste that's going into our landfill is coming from our own treatment plants. So we're looking at alternatives on how we might be able to handle that waste so that it doesn't go to the landfill. Or even taking it to another landfill in La Paz. Republic Services has a landfill in La Paz County that has a 67-year lifespan. Ours probably has 8 or 10 years. So it may behoove us financially to actually haul some of our internal waste to that outside landfill so that we can extend the life of our own and push out that a very expensive alternative of having to close the one that we have and possibly open another. The chances of us being able to open another one within the same proximity of the landfill that we have now is probably slim and none, quite frankly. Given environmental regulations and waters of the U.S. and all of the things that have come along since our landfill was first established, the chances of us being able to open another one, we can't expand the one that we have because it's surrounded by those environmental areas. So we would likely have to pay the expense and up rates to haul our trash outside the area. We want to avoid that for as long as we possibly can. So as the mayor said, we're looking at some pretty substantial changes to how we operate our landfill, what we allow to come into our landfill, how we require commercial and multifamily to do recycling where it was optional before. And often when you have a multifamily complex, like the one across the street there, you won't find recycling bins out there because that's an added extra expense for those customers to get that service. Whereas now we're negotiating or have the opportunity to renegotiate our landfill management contract. We can require things like that. And I believe that's what you're going to see is that now with every commercial dumpster per se behind a commercial business or a multifamily place, you'll also see large-scale recycling going on because it's amazing how much of that solid waste going to our landfill is actually recyclable. And so that there's going to be a big push, not just residential, but in all the other users as well to recycle.
Many of our bars and restaurants, well, all of them, don't really have the ability to recycle. But yet many of them have told us we would love to. And imagine how many bottles and cans and whatnot. And so we want to give them that opportunity to be able to do that. But they have to contract separately. It's not part of our residential contract. They have to, each one of them, because of a state law, is required to contract separately with a provider. And so we're going to try to see if there is a way that we can get them to a point of being able to recycle.
And if we just flat require it, then they'll find a way. And with the change to the type or the method of recycling that we do now, where it's curbside sorting, poor guy in the truck is doing the sorting right there on the street, that's going away, and now they're going to be just coming along and they're going to be dumping everything in your recycling bins into the truck. The truck is going to go to a facility that'll get baled up, and it'll go to Las Vegas into the largest facility of its kind in the world, from what we're told, where all of that goes into a system where it is sorted and handled and bundled and shipped off from Las Vegas. So with that, what they call single stream recycling, that will make providing recycling or requiring recycling in the commercial and multifamily that much easier, because we're just talking about one bin. You're not going to expect a guy to sit out there behind an apartment complex and do the recycling, the sorting for a facility like that out in the parking lot. So, but the single stream does provide the ability to handle that recycling. So that's what we're looking at now. So Haley, please don't report on that yet until we get a little closer, please. Just a little closer. But yes, it is something that we're happy that we had this study done, because here we are about 8 to 10 years out, and it's time now to be making these kinds of changes. Thank goodness, with the report didn't come back and say, your landfill is going to be full next year, because then we'd be in a scramble. We'd be in a true fix. So this is a good time to be doing this work.
Yes, ma'am.
Question for you. Does the city get involved with our healthcare issues? I know our healthcare services are going kind of on a downslope right now. Does the city work with that as we're looking at projected growth to be able to service everyone here with the hospital?
Well, yes and no. Directly, no. Indirectly, we talked to the CEO of the hospital. One of the recruiters for the hospital happens to be on the city council, and that's Jenny Koch. She's our vice mayor. So we certainly talk to them about the various needs that are occurring. They will tell you that trying to find doctors is very difficult to go anywhere, but particularly in rural areas, it is really very difficult. They have a long list of people they're trying to recruit, and it's been at best difficult. I think one of the things, again, this is kind of indirect, that has helped is the fact that the community passed the override and bond issue for the school district, because when the doctors come in and they have young families, they say, I want to talk about your schools. And it's one of the first things they want to talk about. And so that will help quite a bit. But other than that, there isn't a whole lot we can do, because that hospital's a private enterprise. So, but we have no problem explaining the importance. You know what? They know the importance. They're the largest employer in town, and they're looking to expand. They know that the services are needed, especially with an aging population. So, so we're one of the things that we did as part of this America's Best Communities competition, the Havasu Vision 2020 plan, is to try to recruit younger people to this community, because as we all get older, somebody has to provide the service. And if there aren't people here that can provide the service, we look for other locations for that to happen. So we're putting some of those plans in place, and that includes professionals, whether they be doctors, lawyers, accountants, home care individuals, that sort of thing. Interestingly enough, there will be a new development over on Swanson that will be kind of independent living to memory care living. That's going to be occurring over the next couple of years. They've already submitted their plans for it, but basically it'll be right close to the university, where you've got some commercial space, independent living, assisted living, and then memory care. And those are occurring across the nation. And the first question we have, well, why next to a university? Well, that seems to be the popular spot, because there's kind of this lifelong learning, and people want to be able to go to the campus and go to, whether it be a night class or whatever. Who knows? So over time, maybe they turn into dorms. I don't know. So it is. We are doing what we can. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Is there any progress, or is there any plan in place to get a Costco in town? I know they have certain minimums and requirements that...
And we don't get close to them. They want 250,000 people within about an hour's drive, and we don't qualify. We've talked to Costco over the years. I can't tell you how many times, but...
And in the end, they started saying, would you leave us alone?
Yeah, I mean, we just don't have the population base. The population for our entire county is 220,000 people. So, it doesn't mean we'll quit trying, because we don't. But until we're able to meet some of the demographics and population, it's very difficult. We've had our grocery shopping stores that we really liked, and we did property for them. But they go down and they do a complete analysis of your demographics, including how many, the number of people per household, to the age, to everything, and determine whether that model fits. And one where I'm thinking of, we missed it by a small piece, and they said, well, until you get there, we're not going to take a chance on success. So, if people want a Trader Joe's, they want a Costco, we get that. We do too, but until we meet the demographics. it's not gonna happen.
We got that Sam's Club up in Boulder.
Yeah, and there's other stores that went to Bullhead, but they don't, that took a chance in that area, and now they're struggling.
Yeah.
So it's tough. You know, again, for those that, you know, I get a lot of questions about airlines coming to our airport. That's a long ways off, but I would encourage you, when possible, to use Bullhead City. They're getting closer to the numbers that they need, so that American Airlines will stay there. And traveling an hour and 15 versus 2.5 hours is a lot better. Parking is free. You get through the TSA lines just like that. It only goes to Phoenix right now, but again, I would encourage us all to use it whenever possible, because if they can't meet the numbers, they'll leave as well. Anyone else? Chuck?
Are we fully staffed as far as our public safety? As far as what they, you know, for the police department?
We have some vacancies. We're about to come to a full complement in the police department with our next graduating class from the academy. We're having much better luck with getting recruits to come into the academy than we once were. We were having trouble even finding people who wanted to be cops. And ideally, you know, we would like to attract police officers who are already certified and bring them from other places, you know, what they call a lateral. But that can be difficult, you know, when you're, you know, some people perceive us as being out here in the middle of nowhere and out in the middle of the stinking desert, and, you know, who wants, but those that are coming here are actually doing more of more homework, and we're finding folks that want to escape the urban ills of wherever they might be, and would, you know, want to move their families to a place like this. So we're seeing a bit of a shift there. So the police department is looking pretty good. Fire department is pretty easy to recruit for. We have a number of retirements, and you know, there's a certain level of turnover that happens in the fire department just kind of naturally. And we're not having any issues with filling that academy. So far so good. We may be down a few numbers at this point, but that's not unusual at all.
Other questions? No one? Mr. Burley?
The Havasu Riviera, how's that project coming along?
We're waiting on the developer at this point in time. The road is graded, but what the developer is doing right now is determining the additional infrastructure costs in total. Some of their initial numbers were pretty high, and so their engineers are taking another look at them. So we're hopeful that we will be entering into a development agreement in the next couple of months. So,
How's the relationship with the state parks on the launch ramp project? Is that still?
it's a good relationship. We hope that we can get this agreement in place. They need to, I know the developer has made a number of adjustments in their own operations and what they own, say up at the foothills and a few other things. And so I'm hopeful they'll get started on the launch ramp shortly, but they're still waiting for the 404 permit from the feds.
From where?
From the federal government, the Army Corps of Engineers. Yeah, but they weren't really, well, they were actually expecting to get it sometime this month. This was a few months ago. So hopefully that's really going to occur. Because you can't move much dirt until you get it.
I'll be meeting with them today just for an update. So next time we meet, I'll probably have some better information for you.
Need any help, let me know.
Okay, appreciate it. Chuck?
Is the developer having any the area that we're gonna develop with the center and the
Yes.
botanical garden and all that, are they involved in any of that?
Not really. I mean,
Yeah.
only thing is that, you know, we're sharing some of the road costs and that sort of thing,
Right.
and the infrastructure costs, but beyond that, not really a whole lot.
Are we being held back at all anywhere?
No.
About developing that, putting money into that at all?
No.
Have we
No.
started any process on
We
that?
have, as the mayor mentioned earlier, with the grading is done. We still haven't knocked down that berm that would attach it to the highway. But the grading is done. We have budgeted for the next phase of the roadway construction, which includes the utilities, the paving, all the finish work, plus the new intersection on the highway. So that's, we're poised and ready to begin that work, but there's information that we need from the developers with respect to what their needs are regarding the buried infrastructure that we're going to be putting in that road before we pave it. The conduit sizes for the electrical, the water line sizes based on what their fire flows and their domestic water needs are going to be, and whatever other flows they might have. There's going to be a force main, which is a pressurized wastewater line that's going to be coming back up the hill. We didn't need to know from them what size that needs to be, because they're paying for their incremental upsizing of all of those utilities. But obviously, we're not going to start the work. We're not going to start tearing up the road to put stuff in the ground that we don't know what size it's going to be, or who's going to pay how much of what and when. So those are the details that are going to be worked out before we issue a contract to let that work.
Now, all that infrastructure that's gonna go through there where it's gonna tie into 95, is that gonna cover all of their homes they wanna put in that, or are they gonna go up to a Comet or it seems to me that some of the farthest south stuff would be.
Well, there would be dual access.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll loop those systems wherever possible.
Right.
Frankly, I have not seen the schematic diagram of how they're going to bring water to that facility. Obviously, we try to get those systems looped as often as possible, just for redundancy purposes. And if there's a line break, we can still get water to at least half the people. Those kinds of engineering details are still being worked on as we speak. And as soon as all those numbers are nailed down, and we'll know exactly what's going in the ground, and we can tailor the construction project accordingly.
So basically, if they put the launch ramp in, they're gonna put in restrooms and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
So they're gonna have to do all that. So right now, if it's gonna open, say, next April or May, they're gonna have to just put basics in, like the launch ramp and maybe the docks and parking lots.
Well, I would expect that they will have the whole state park, public launch, dry storage facility, maybe save the restaurant building itself. We're hoping that will all be ready to use by maybe this time next year, maybe even before, if everything goes just right. But we wouldn't put infrastructure in the ground just to serve those initial facilities.
Right.
Whatever we put in the ground is going to be sized for the ultimate build out, for obvious reasons. We don't want to go back and tear up a brand new roadway to upsize a line.
Yes, ma'am.
Has there anything been said about Hastings? I know you mentioned something. It was sold, maybe
Well-
public announcement? I thought it was sold.
Apparently it's sold, it has a sold sign on it. The initial group that we thought was going in, we don't know for sure at this point. Is that right, or are they backed out?
Nobody's backed out at this point.
Okay,
You
so-
might be confusing with the Popeyes thing. Yeah, Popeyes was different. Popeyes was going to go in where the classic burger was.
Right. But they're
Apparently
not.
that deal fell through with the landowner, and they're still going to build something there. As far as Hastings is concerned, yes,
There's interest, but nothing solid.
we've gotten some some requests for information from some providers that, I don't want to tell you who it is
Oh, okay.
because
That's fine.
it may
It's
not.
still, something's going on and it's still
Yes.
Sure.
moving forward.
Yes.
Yeah, there is a group that's seriously looking at it, but you know what, we've had that before and then they
So
back
it's not
out.
Definite, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I remember back several years ago when Olive Garden actually announced they were going to go out at the mall, and the mall developers made a big announcement and whatnot, and then the corporate organization was struggling and backed out. So
They had a building permit.
yeah, they had a building.
They had process plans. They had made the announcement. They were ready to go. We were going to have an Olive Garden, and then word came out. It's like, no, we're not going to do it. So I certainly don't want to contribute to something like that by saying, we got a letter from Costco or whatever.
Yeah, it's not Costco.
It's not Costco. But and then have that, get fed back to me at some point in the future with, what were you thinking?
We don't want
So,
to be accused of spreading rumors.
thank you.
Now, I know that Olive Garden has been developing a smaller version of their normal size restaurant.
That's what was going to go out at the mall, and
The smaller version?
they backed out.
Who needs an Olive Garden? You got Vita Dolce, you got Angelina's, you got Mario's. We have the best Italian food anywhere.
Agreed.
This Olive Garden thing just blows my mind.
Anyone else?
The bread.
Is the Riviera project basically on schedule?
But I'd say overall, yes. I
It's
think in
slipped a
our
little bit.
mind, it's slipped a couple of months. But
That's not unusual at this stage.
yeah, that's
That's
not-
why I asked, because they fluctuate all the time.
That's a huge project.
it is.
So-
You're talking about 600 homes roughly and
What
some
kind of
commercial space.
population growth are they looking at for that area?
I think they're looking at about 600 homes down in that area.
2.5.
Is that
people per
including
home.
the townhomes they want to put in?
Mhm.
Yeah, well, they'll be kind of they'll range from, I guess what I would call townhomes or lock and leave or whatever you want to call it, to kind of estates. Because you get closer to the water, I'm sure there are going to be some pretty nice places.
Are they going to make it any of that like RE designation?
Artie?
RE.
Oh, RE.
Yeah, I've asked that question before, what's going to be private, what's going to be public, I would like to know how they're going to lay out the infrastructure. And I've seen conceptual drawings and I've seen some very pretty artwork, but when you look at it from a municipal services delivery standpoint, it's nice to know where the gates are going to be, because that determines where the public ends and where the private begins, and it can be very complicated. I do believe that there will be some of those smaller neighborhoods that will be gated and will likely be custom home lots. There's going to be some absolutely beautiful properties up there. I've got mine picked out. But I'm just kidding.
I was kind of talking about like height restrictions and, RE, you can go up.
They haven't gotten that
Yeah,
far.
we have got to that point. I
We're
haven't
not
seen
even
a
close.
subdivision plat, so our planners have not had an opportunity to look at it from a zoning perspective. It's all just raw land at this point, so we could only speculate on how that might go. But that's why a project of this magnitude the timelines can go all over the place, because there's a lot of moving parts in this very large machine.
June.
What is your countdown?
I don't know.
Yeah, you do.
No, I don't. December 29th will be my last day at the city.
The last time we seen you, you were 187 and so many.
So many, hours.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just too busy to think about it, although I do from time to time.
The other thing is, isn't the next, not the one on the 8th council meeting, but the one after that, isn't that canceled?
Yes.
Correct.
think it's the
And then in
22nd.
December,
22nd is, August 22nd, council meeting is canceled because most of us are down at the League of Arizona Cities and Towns Conference. Yep. Yes, sir.
If you're leaving the 29th, how's the recruiting going for your replacement?
Well, I teased him the other day and said, well, as soon as we can figure out what the hell he did, we'll probably try to find somebody.
Nice.
No,
Thanks, man.
what we're doing is Human Resources is right now putting out requests for proposals for a headhunter because we have found over the years that someone of his position, you get a lot better quality of candidates using a professional headhunter. So once that is done and we select a headhunter, then the council will meet with the headhunter probably in a work session of sorts and lay out our expectations, not only on the type of candidates we're looking for, but how to cull them down, whether or not we want to interview 7 or 5 or 3 or whatever it is, and lay that plan out. And then in the end, what we hope to do is have somebody in place in January. We understand that's going to be difficult because of the holidays, but that's what we're hoping for. If it takes longer than that, we can appoint somebody in-house as an interim. But it's a very important position, and we want to make sure we get the right person to be in that position, not only from an experience and qualifications, but we want to make sure they want to live here long term. Because you get too many where people think that they want to come to Lake Havasu City and they see the lake and whatever, but forget that we are a rural area.
And it's 120 degrees some days.
And,
That's a
yeah,
big
and
factor.
and our neighbors are 60 miles away and all the rest of that good stuff. So it will be a process, but we're confident we'll find a good person.
Somebody that has the same vision that we have now as a city,
Not
practicing the same program.
was the same vision, and I don't want to embarrass Charlie at all, but also the same willingness to share information readily, because he and we meet virtually every day, and just we have a relationship where we can share ideas, argue. We kind of have permission with each other to kind of vet ideas and projects and whatnot without anybody feeling insulted or anything else. But also, Charlie gets a lot of information that doesn't come directly to me, but he readily shares it so that I'm always prepared for whatever comes. Not all city managers are like that. They want to hold that information close to them. Well, that's not the type of city manager we want. We want somebody that's going to share everything with the city council so that when we go out in public and something occurs, we aren't sitting there going, what are you talking about? So, and that's sometimes hard to find.
Lake Havasu City is a much more attractive community for city manager candidates than it may have once been, quite frankly. In fact, an example of that is when I was interviewing finalists for our operations department director position. One of the finalists was out of Michigan. And he was one of, I think, 2 finalists, and we flew him in for a one-on-one interview, and I asked him point blank, I said, so why Lake Havasu City? Why now? And he said, I've been following Lake Havasu City in the America's Best Communities competition. Said it became apparent to my wife and I when we started talking about it that this was the kind of place where we would like to live. So, that was very heartwarming for me because, we spent 2.5, almost 3 years in that competition, and it's nice to know that we've been noticed by much of the rest of the world, not just because of that, but because of the fact that this is just an awesome place, and we are getting a lot more publicity through social media and other sources And people are noticing that we're here. We are becoming not just a destination, but also a consideration for where people want to live. And so that will, I think, I have utmost confidence that City Council is going to have a very qualified group of candidates for this position. But Mayor's wise in being very careful about how they make that decision, because this position is a critical component in what we do on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Chuck?
You're gonna put a list of job duties out to, including carrying a trash can around and explaining to people how they work and I'll tell you.
No.
I went to Charlie on several occasions about different things, and a couple times I didn't heed his warnings or advice and that, and I really fell into it. So I think he's very level-headed and great for the city, and I hate to see him go.
Well, thank you,
So
Chuck.
do we.
Thank you. I'm not going anywhere. I live here now, so I'll be around. I'll be volunteering. I'll be, I might just go to council meetings and heckle from the back row. Who knows?
All
In
right.
other words, you're gonna be part of the problem then.
You got to have that balance, right, Sonny?
We're running out of time, so next meeting is where?
It's going to be the second Friday of the month because of Labor Day holiday, and it's going to be at Mackay's.
So second Friday in September at Mackay's. What is the date?
September 8th.
The 8th, September 8th. So,
And thanks to the Bagel Bin for
yep,
sponsoring us today.
absolutely appreciate it. So with that, thank you all for being here. We always enjoy these meetings, and we hope to see you next time.